In the 1950s, a man who would be president was apparently having an affair with a young woman in this Washington townhouse. Inevitably, a photograph of the man leaving in the early morning found its way into Hoover's growing file on Senator John F. Kennedy. The day after he was elected president, John Kennedy reappointed J. Edgar Hoover as director of the FBI.
Lyndon Johnson told me that J. Edgar Hoover loathed and despised both Bobby Kennedy and President Kennedy, and that J. Edgar Hoover had extensive files on President Kennedy's womanizing.
When Kennedy won the nomination, he surprised almost everyone by asking Johnson to be vice president. Until now, history has recorded that Kennedy only made the offer as a goodwill gesture and was shocked when Johnson accepted. The Johnson nomination has always been a mystery because the Kennedy brothers made the decision in secret and vowed never to tell what happened. But one other person did hear parts of their private conversation at the Biltmore Hotel.
They were huddled together closely on the bed discussing this tremendous issue about Lyndon B. Johnson being on the ticket.
Evelyn Lincoln says that what she heard that day convinced her the Kennedys were being blackmailed.
Lyndon B. Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover had boxed them into a hole. They were absolutely boxed in.
And so history was made. Lyndon Johnson ran on the Democratic ticket and eventually became the 36th President of the United States. The day after John F. Kennedy was killed, Hoover and Tolson went to Pimlico to spend a day at the races. Hoover would remain director of the FBI for the rest of his life.
J. Edgar Hoover celebrates his 40th year as head of the FBI, and there's a simple ceremony in his office to mark the occasion. Mr. Hoover, the FBI chief will reach retirement age this year, but President Johnson has signed a bill permitting him to stay on.
Whether we like it or not, it's always been true that a public man's private sex life makes him vulnerable.
Gordon Novell, a controversial figure with connections to the intelligence community. Novell, who had worked for the White House in the early 1960s, became involved in a complicated legal action which the White House wanted him to pursue, but which Hoover wanted dropped.
So I went to the White House, and the White House sent me to Mr. Angleton, Director of Counterintelligence, CIA. We met in a restaurant, and I told him my problem, and he says, I know what your problem is. He said, you need to tell Mr. Hoover that you've met with me and that you're not going to dismiss the lawsuit and that you've seen this. At which point he opened up his briefcase and pulled out a couple of photographs of Mr. Hoover in flagrante delicto, I guess is one way to describe it. Having oral sex.
I found out early in the marriage that my husband was bisexual. He was involved with Roy Cohn, the assistant counsel to Senator McCarthy. There was a sign on the door where he led me to, not to disturb. And we knocked on the door, and Roy Cohn opened the door. And we went in, and there was this gentleman. He was dressed as a woman, and Roy introduced me. He said, "I'd like you to meet Mary." Well, I knew the name wasn't Mary because he looked just like J. Edgar Hoover. In fact, he was very solid looking, and he had like a little growth, and he was dressed in a black chiffon dress, very short with ruffles, and a black lace stockings, and high heel shoes, and a black curly wig, and black false eyelashes. And he was sitting, he crossed his legs.
Now, wait a minute. You're saying it looked like J. Edgar Hoover, or it was clearly to you J. Edgar Hoover?
It was clearly to me J. Edgar Hoover.
Do you have any doubt at all about that?
Absolutely not. I heard Rosenstiel say that if Hoover ever brings pressure against Lansky or any of us, we'll use this as blackmail. We'll expose him.